Ladies and gentlemen, I have the pleasure and the honor of introducing you to Cyndy Robinson, who has been an absolute mainstay of the progress and work that is done in a number of organizations. But when we met, and she is still there working away at it, it was in a position with NAAAP. Now, one of the things that we share is an absolutely profound level of commitment to living a whole life, not just being in our community work and in our professional work. And it was in that light that I had asked Cyndy to join us because she is one of those people who manages to combine her commitment to her communities, and yes, the plural is on purpose, as well as taking her professional growth quite seriously. Along the line, she also teaches karate, something I have never mastered, lacking all form of
Mhm.
coordination. So if I'm ever in North Carolina, I'm going to look you up. And
Sure.
also, she actually watches TV, which is such a comfort because sometimes I think those of us who watch series get a little embarrassed to admit it. So one of the key questions, of course, is the good fight on par standard with the good wife?
That's great. I didn't know that you knew I watched those.
I do my homework like any project
Okay.
manager.
Yep.
So the first question that I would like to ask of you is, because you've got such a varied background, you went from a degree in human biology, you have been involved in the performing arts, and at the same time, you have followed a social conscience that I confess I am in awe of. What kind of lessons have you learned along the way that you think probably would not have had the same impact if you'd picked them up from a book or, God forbid, a podcast?
Mhm. Um, Sorry, a little bit of noise back there. If you would just post that question one more time.
Of course. So, with all the background that you have, it's quite varied. You've gone from a degree in human biology from Stanford in my own backyard back in California, no less, to being involved in community theater and performing arts, and yet following a social conscience that is, I'm in awe of. Um, there are lessons in leadership along the way. Is there anything in particular that you think would not have had the same impact if you'd gotten it from a book or a podcast?
Yeah, I think there's so many moving parts to making things work. I was just talking with a mentee today about resources. There's human resources, there's financial resources, and then there's something I call political will and teamwork. In our organization at NAP, there's a lot of things that are possible with sponsorship. There's a lot of things that are possible with subject matter experts. Like we have accountants who help us out. We have full-time marketers who want to be part of our volunteer, core team. But if we don't communicate and we don't have a common vision, we can't seem to move forward. And if we don't have the political will to take sometimes difficult steps, we can't move the ball forward. And that's where I think leadership comes in. Um, I've always thought that leaders are people who can push a vision, an agenda, a common agenda, and sometimes a personal agenda when others don't see it and others don't necessarily think it's time for it. So I think timing has a lot to do with it. Leaders have to be just willing to push a little bit, but not so far ahead that people can't follow. I've worked with scientific leaders, I've worked with political leaders who were so far ahead that as their speechwriter or their communication director, I'd say, you got to slow it down, break it into like bite-sized chunks that people can follow. So I think a leader has to be a little bit more of a pioneer, but also approachable enough that they can, you know, create the political will, create the teamwork that actually moves the ball forward. So that's what I was talking to my mentee about this morning. Um, we also, I mean, in every place that I've done, you mentioned performing arts, and I'm thinking, okay, you must be referencing my short 2 years with Rand Theatrical Society at Stanford. I was never on stage. I always enabled people to be on stage, and I think that's been my role in many teams. I'll give you another example. In graduate school, there were some folks that wanted to start a journal on economic development. And I knew I wasn't going to be the author. I wasn't going to be smart enough or skilled enough or deep enough on any subject to write the articles that would be peer reviewed and published. But I became the editor in chief and more of a publisher. So finding the printers, finding the audience, doing the market research to know how we would actually garner subscribers. So that, in theater, I was the house manager, I was a producer. With the journal, I was the executive director, the sponsorship person, the publisher. And now at NAAAP, again, there's many other people who make the organization sing and soar, but I'm making sure that they have the resources they need, whether it's budget, volunteers, or political will.
It sounds to me like that's a perfect example of a phrase that has fallen out of, fashionable favor, but servant leadership, of leadership that enables and leadership that empowers. And I remember when I first started in performing arts myself, I had several directors who would not let you audition unless members of their crew, members of all those people who made the production really possible, would say, yeah, she worked crew, or she worked, backstage, or she did costuming, or she did
Yeah.
lights and things like that. They simply would not allow you to audition if you weren't vetted, because it told
Hmm.
them that you understood the importance of the work that was happening anywhere except on stage.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, I think
Yep.
there's a lack of understanding sometimes. How do you think people respond to that philosophy of leadership? It has, on the surface, a lot less spotlight appeal, but seems to me to be so much more intrinsically satisfying and fulfilling.
Yeah. I think whether it's theater or sports or even restaurant management, my parents, between the two of them, own 4 restaurants. And they're of the belief there's a couple of things about customer service. The customer's always right. The rules are there to protect people, but let's try to expand or extend our use of the rules. And you have to be willing to do and able to do every team member's role. So a manager and the restaurant owner really has to go back and be able to wash dishes, bus tables, serve tables, figure out the tax and tip. You have to be able to do everything. So me personally, I do subscribe to that. My challenge personally and professionally is to delegate and to follow up and to hold a really high standard. I think I've been around organizations, NAP included, where people are selected for their aptitude. And if they're not 100% able to deliver on day one, I'm very patient with those individuals. I give them a lot of amnesty, give them a lot of coaching. Um, and that's the beauty of a nonprofit, I think. In the for-profit, where you're paid, if you can't deliver highest quality on day one, you'll get reprimanded. You might be on a individual development plan, or you might be fired. So in a nonprofit, I think leadership is about selecting people for their commitment, their passion, their aptitude, their potential. But then I've personally have found that I've been a little bit more tolerant and patient with less than perfect. And I don't know that everyone agrees with me there. So there are times when, like, I'm, kind of filling in and trying to make up for work that wasn't done perfectly or quickly enough, and that is my failure to delegate, my failure to hold people to a high standard. So my workaround there and my own lesson for leadership is always communicate the criteria and the standards and expectations early on. If we can agree on that, then I think everybody has an easier path to getting to what those expectations are. And then if there is a reprimand or a change in team members that's necessary, it's a little bit easier to swallow because you agreed on the criteria, you agreed on the expectations.
I think one of the reasons that I was introduced to NAP was because Ray Ju, who was at the time the president of a not-for-profit organization, and I was his chief staff, said that he wanted me to see how other people were doing that kind of leadership role who were in charge of things. And
Hmm.
I think one of the things that I took away from watching you and a number of other the leaders at one of the conferences was that it wasn't do it my way, it was do it your way to our agreed upon levels of excellence.
Yeah, yeah, I think that is a great way of operating. And if we didn't do it then, we should continue doing it now. Yep. Yep. I'm JJ's mom.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet
I'm his
you.
roommate. I'm Gabriel.
Hi, Gabriel. How are you? Sorry. Sorry,
Oh
we're
no, listen, if you
yep.
hear hammers, it would not surprise me. They're using a nail gun in theirs.
Okay. I haven't heard anything yet. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm talking all rainbows and butterflies right now. These are ideals, right? These are ideals for leadership,
And
and
they don't always happen and they don't always work. And sometimes
they
we
don't always work. And I think the other flip side of nonprofit and problem solving is if we don't all see the problems the same way, so we don't all come up with the same solutions. And some of the solutions we've never really implemented. So we're creating as we go along. And when you're innovating and creating, you don't always have the perfect answer because it doesn't quite match the criteria or the expectations. So I mean, there's many times that we miss the mark, right, as a nonprofit, but we continue trying. And I think that's what I enjoy about nonprofit versus federal work, where I spent 19 years, is that there are standards of excellence, but the actual creative solution might be different from what you had expected. There's a lot of creativity, a lot of personal perspectives. Hey, we can get this done.
Yeah, I think that part and parcel of being invested in your personal leadership is understanding the different ways that the environment in which you are leading is going to require perhaps a different set of skills or skills applied just a little bit differently based on the environment that you're in.
Hmm.
And the patience and the coaching that you had spoken of earlier is probably one of the key issues that I think gives you the opportunity to demonstrate and walk the talk of a leadership model that is much more enlightened than what sometimes the for-profit or commercial sector understands might in the long run actually be a better idea for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you look at, because we're not 20 anymore.
Hmm.
So when we started, there were things that were challenges. Are you finding, sadly, that there are challenges out there that you had sort of hoped we as a society would have overcome by now?
Hmm. I think um, I'm still discovering. I think the more I learn, the more I realize that there are facets of problems that I didn't even realize were there. I do feel like when I recently started reading a book by an African American woman who was an early CEO in the technology sector, and she starts her first chapter with, "I was born a few years after the beginning of the civil rights era." And I'm like, wow, she's only 2 years older than me. That means I was in the middle of all that. So to think that in the last 55 years that we have really come a long way desegregating classrooms, um, being okay, I think okay with interracial marriage. I'm in an interracial marriage.
I
That
was.
there's so, that's a lot of progress. But to know that even today there's still people who wave a Confederate flag and don't understand why that's offensive. That people will hurt Asian seniors because they can get away with it, or they think get away with it. The cowardice and the stupidity just floors me. It floors me. I said to my husband the other day, I said, I don't know, watching the news about people arguing about that to vaccinate you or not using masks. I can't believe that we're talking about those issues when it's also National Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and it's also the other day we were talking about um, shootings in gay clubs. Like, why is there so much intolerance that still exists? That just bores me. That we can't be nicer and kinder to people. Because
Ex-
like we spend so
exactly.
much energy being intolerant. Like if we could spend more energy being accepting and inclusive, I think we would have a lot more time to do the right things. Just yeah, it floors me. But um, we were talking about what's worse: domestic violence, bigotry, um, waste of resources, corruption, what's happening in Haiti, all things that the only way I can deal with them personally as a leader and as a person is to know that my circle of control is much smaller than my circle of interest, and that I have to focus on my circle of control. Otherwise, drive myself nuts, right? And so those are some of the, I think, lessons of leadership too. Is you can't be spinning your wheels about things you have no either expertise in or control over. And that those were one of the lessons I learned at EPA. I went to a woman who was not very well understood, but very well respected. She's very, very senior. Done a lot of things for the Chesapeake Bay and the waterways and the quality of water. And I asked her, I said, "Hey, Rebecca, you've been brought in from another program to manage, a lot of programs here in our region. How do you make your daily decisions on what to spend your time on?" And she goes, "Oh, it's easy. Because we are at the Environmental Protection Agency. There are statutes. That's the first thing. If I must do it by law, I have to focus on it. Then there's regulations that EPA produces that we have to pay attention to, and then there's policies that I can have influence over because it's in my region, it's in my wheelhouse. And lastly, can I make a difference with my skill set? If not, I'm not spending time on it. But if I have to do it or I should be doing it, I'll do it. Should I be doing it in terms of my skill set?" And I'm thinking, wow, that was very powerful for me because I'm interested in so many things, but I can only control and I can only make a difference. I can only move the needle on a few things. So that's where I spend my time.
I think that's something that we frequently forget when people talk about time management. They talk about setting aside time for this,
Hmm.
setting aside time for that. And I think that somewhere along the line, perhaps I'm oversimplifying it, the prioritization and the why, I think that's something that we frequently forget when people talk about time management. They talk about setting aside time for this,
Hmm.
setting aside time for that. And I think that somewhere along the line, perhaps I'm oversimplifying it, the prioritization and the why of that prioritization can get a little lost. So that tends
Yeah.
to be more of an issue. Uh, you do a lot of mentoring, and I've frankly been using your approach in many cases as a model for how I choose to coach and mentor certain people. It's, can I actually help them? Can I actually do anything for them in terms of offering a sounding board? Because it's not always about what I think they should do. It's more about what can I open up their minds to so that they see that there might be other options. There might be other options that they
Said
can.
like a trooper. Said like a trooper. Yep.
Oh gosh. Well, the thing that caused me to think about that was if you had the opportunity to go back to you earlier in your career and say, "Hey, look, Cyndy, what kind of counsel, what kind of advice, or what kind of thought would you want to leave that younger version of you with?"
Um, I think I would have advised myself to be really strategic. You can't do everything. Strategy means leaving a few things undone, but doing the most important things first. So at the time when I was at EPA, my goal was to become a senior executive by age 35 without hurting anybody's feelings or stepping on anyone's toes. I don't know if that's possible. I mean, it's still career advancement is competitive. Not everybody rises to the top. Um, and I think I waffled a lot in dabbling in too many things. I could have driven for excellence and depth in one area more so. Um, and I think I would have also, I don't know if this is a Asian female thing. I would have asked for more from the people around me. I would have asked for more dollars for training. I would have asked to go to conferences and been a squeaky wheel more. I just feel like I just always settled. Okay, you're not gonna send me this year. Okay, there must be a reason. Instead of really questioning it,
I know.
invested more in me.
I'm not so sure you're wrong there.
Okay.
I was raised by my grandparents, so in essence, even though I'm a fourth generation Californian, I was raised by the first generation of my
Hmm.
family, the Shores. And for any people, it takes about 3 or 4 generations before you have been about as fully assimilated into the dominant society as you could be. And there is a different set of expectations of behavior and expectations of comportment. You do not do certain things. It is disrespectful. It implies
Right.
they didn't think of it.
Yep.
It implies that they aren't wise in how they make their decisions. And what struck me about what you said was, or maybe it implies that they just have a lot on their mind and have a lot going on, and I need to help them remember that I'm here and I'm contributing, and I want to be able to contribute more, but in order to do that, I need to ask you for this.
Yes.
I was, for about the first 10 years of my career anyway, convinced that all I had to do was work really, really
Yeah.
hard
Really hard.
and they
Oh
would
no,
see my
nobody will.
value.
Yeah. Mhm.
kind of kind of didn't work. You've got such
I
a holistic I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I was gonna say, I do have to wrap it up really soon here, but I was gonna say, the advice I give a lot of young women today is if there's a job that you think you may qualify for 50% of the expectations, go ahead and apply because your male counterparts are applying. They think, oh, I can do that. You don't have to be able to do 100% of the tasks that are described in the job description to apply. That's the first thing. Second thing I tell them is always negotiate your salary for more. Because if you don't ask now, you will never ask, and you will pretty much lose $500,000 or $1 million over your career for starting at a lower pay rate, because your
It
promotions and
follows you.
follows you. And so I could probably have told myself that. The other thing that I tell a lot of young people now is you lead not only in your workplace, but in your family and your community. So for NAAAP's 40th anniversary, I'm working with our chief marketing officer on this concept of leadership in all places. He calls it limitless leadership. And what we mean by that is that, again, you can be a leader at every rank, junior, mid-level, senior. You can be a leader in every region, in every geography. I've lived in San Francisco, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, now North Carolina. Now we're all very virtual. You can lead in the workplace, you can lead in your family, and you can lead in your community. If you want to influence what your environment looks like for the next generation and the people who live around you physically, you have to get involved in a nonprofit, you have to get on a board, you have to join a PTA, you have to speak up, So that's my big, I hope that might be my legacy with NAP, is that we aren't just all doing a corporate climb, but that we try to get involved in our local communities. And I think it's already part of the culture at NAP, which is we find ourselves in every one of our 28 chapters, while they have different signature events and they have different kinds of leaders. I think what's common about all the NAP chapters is that they enjoy pan-Asian connections, pan-professional networking, and community service. So that community service can go beyond just like, hey, I volunteered at the food bank, or I'm tutoring someone, but I'm actually leading. I got on the board of, North Carolina's in civic engagement, or, Leadership Atlanta, or the Boston Big Brothers Big Sisters program, right? So that's advocating these days.
Well, Cyndy, I know that I, well, Cyndy, I know that I've imposed upon your time, and I am so very grateful that you took a call from somebody like I dimly remember who this person is.
I don't think of you as dimly remember. I think of you as one of my first role models and first connections at NET.
Oh, thank you.
And I remember being one of the two people that we were really trying to understand how to have a better connection with PMI, the Project Management Institute.
I haven't given up on that, but what I
Okay.
have also learned is that there are communities within the project management community that I think might be more resonant and might be more responsive.
Yeah.
So I almost never give up. Almost never. Thank you for not just your time today, but also because I think that by helping people understand the very nature of what you can accomplish when you strengthen your own leadership, you can help change the world. You just need to remember where you can help change the world as you have. So thank you very much for your time and for sharing
Well,
your
thank you,
thoughts.
Kimi, for giving me a chance to kind of express that. Yeah, this is kind of a thought lab. It's still going.
Well, my
It's
pleasure.
getting clearer every day.
I think that's true for most of life. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for joining.
Right.